believe in forgiving or forgetting?
When I bought my first brand new car at the age of 42, it wasn't just a vehicle to me, it was a monument to every overtime shift I had dragged myself through, every no I said when I wanted to say yes, every vacation I never took. And every time I bit my tongue instead of asking for help because I didn't want to owe anyone anything. It was pearl white, smooth like bone china, with black leather seats that still had that factory fresh scent I used to dream about while taking the bus home from the grocery store with my hands digging into cheap plastic bags. I chose the SUV not because I needed that much space, but because I wanted to feel like I had finally taken up some room in this world without apologizing for it. I picked it up on a Thursday. By the second Sunday, it was gone. I woke up that morning expecting nothing more exciting than a solo brunch and maybe a car wash. I was babying the hell out of that car, I won't lie, but instead, I found the driveway empty and my heart pounding in a way I hadn't felt since I caught my ex-husband cheating on me 8 years ago. At first, I thought maybe I'd parked around the block, maybe I left it at the grocery store last night and forgot. Ridiculous, I know, but you go through every possible innocent explanation when your mind doesn't want to go where you know it's headed. Then I saw Derek's beat-up old sneakers, missing from the front porch, and my stomach dropped. I already knew. I didn't need the text I got 15 minutes later, took the new ride for a spin. Be back soon, winky face. But it came anyway, like a slap. See, Derek is my younger brother by 6 years, and if you ask my mom, he's just a late bloomer, but if you ask me, he's a professional mess who somehow manages to land on his feet every damn time he screws up. While I was working my way through community college and saving every penny at the diner, he was out crashing skateboards into parked cars and charming his way out of trouble with those dumb blue eyes and that fake innocent grin. Derek has always had a talent for making his disasters look like accidents, and people let him get away with it because he made them laugh. He made my mom laugh when she cried after my dad left. He made my aunt laugh at Dad's funeral when I couldn't say a word. And he made me laugh too, when I should have been angry, but this time, I wasn't laughing. This time, I was shaking. He showed up around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I was standing in the yard with my arms crossed so tight they hurt. He pulled up in an Uber, stepped out with sunglasses on, looking more like a hungover college kid than a man of 36. He didn't say sorry. He didn't even look nervous. Instead, he grinned, pointed behind him with his thumb, and said, "Well, she's totaled." Just like that. As if he dropped a damn coffee cup, not a $38,000 vehicle I hadn't even made my first payment on. My mouth opened, but no sound came out because I swear I could feel my brain glitching. I asked him if he was drunk. He said, "Relax. It wasn't my fault." A dog ran out in front of me. Sucker came out of nowhere. I asked if he was okay, not because I cared right then, but because it was the only sentence I could form that didn't include the words jail or murder. He waved me off, said he had a seatbelt on and just a scratch, and then laughed again. And that's when he said it. That smug, half-smiling, always wins phrase that burned straight through my chest. They'll guilt you into forgiving me. They always do. And in that moment, I knew exactly what he meant. I could already hear my mother's voice in my head, soft and pleading, saying he didn't mean it, and you know how Derek is, and what's the point in staying mad? I could see my dad shaking his head like he didn't approve, but not lifting a damn finger to hold Derek accountable. I could see my aunt squeezing my shoulder and whispering, "Family first, sweetheart." I could hear the words before they ever hit the air, and I hated how well he knew it. That evening, while I was sitting alone in my kitchen trying to figure out how I was going to file an insurance claim without losing my mind, my phone lit up with a message from my mom. Just 6 words, "Can you come over tomorrow night?" That's all she said, but I already knew what it meant. There would be a family dinner. There would be a lot of talking around the problem, a few jokes, maybe even a dessert. Someone would say, "We've all made mistakes," and someone else would say, "It's just a car," and they would all look at me like I was the problem if I didn't smile and nod. But what they didn't know, not yet, was that Derek hadn't just borrowed my car. He had stolen something much bigger. He had stolen the last fragile thread of trust one had left for him. And more than that, he had forgotten one little detail. One tiny piece of technology that came free with the dealership special. There was a dash cam on that brand new car. And I hadn't told anyone it was there. Not yet. Now let me ask you something. If someone in your family keeps burning bridges and dancing across the ashes like it's no big deal, how many times are you supposed to forgive them? At what point do you say that's it? Is it after the first betrayal? The fifth? The 100th? Or do we just keep swallowing it, smiling through it, pretending it's fine until it finally explodes? Because for me, that explosion started the second he smirked and walked into my house like nothing had happened. And trust me, no one had any idea what was coming next. Not even Derek. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from work or age or even lack of sleep. It's the slow, aching fatigue of being the person in the family who keeps the peace while biting back the truth. Of always being the one to absorb the damage while everyone else pretends nothing happened. That's the exhaustion I felt sitting in my car, parked outside my mother's house the next evening, staring at the porch light flickering like some bad omen while my fingers dug into the steering wheel as if the pressure alone could hold back everything I didn't want to say. I already knew what the night was going to look like. I could picture it as clearly as if it had already happened. Mom would greet me with that soft, careful voice she always used when something awful had just occurred and she needed everyone to act like it hadn't. The house would smell like her cheap vanilla candles and leftover casserole, and everyone would be sitting in their usual spots. Dad on the far end of the couch with a beer he wouldn't drink, Derek somewhere in the middle like a smug little prince, and my Aunt Joan perched on the recliner, clutching her rosary but not saying a word unless it was to mention how sensitive I'd always been. And that's exactly what it was. No surprises. No apologies either. As soon as I walked in, my mom hugged me like I was a soldier returning from war, like I was already halfway broken and needed saving. She didn't mention the car. She didn't ask me how I was holding up. Instead, she offered me lasagna and told me to sit down, like the stench of melted metal and shattered glass wasn't still clinging to my clothes. I sat anyway because walking out would have only proven their point, that I was, once again, being too dramatic. Derek was already there, lounging with his feet up on the coffee table like he owned the place, sipping soda from a bottle I bought for Mom last week. He didn't stand when I walked in. Didn't flinch. Just looked up, smirked like he was enjoying some private joke, and said, "Hey, big sis. Glad you're here. I was just telling everyone how wild that dog was, came out of nowhere like a rocket." And then he laughed, like it was funny, like it was something out of a movie. No one else laughed. But no one stopped him either. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab that bottle out of his hand and smash it against the wall and ask everyone why they were sitting there like we hadn't all witnessed the same decades-long pattern of him screwing up and me being told to take the high road. But I didn't. Instead, I swallowed that scream like I'd swallowed 1,000 others, because I knew what was coming next, and I wanted to hear it straight from their mouths. Dad spoke first, his voice low and tired, the same way it always was when he didn't want to take sides, but couldn't bear the silence. "He didn't mean to, Rachel. Accidents happen. You're both okay, that's what matters." As if being okay could erase the fact that my car, the one I had saved for, planned for, sacrificed for, was now sitting in a scrapyard because his son had decided to play fast and loose with someone else's property. Then came Aunt Joan, who didn't even look up from her knitting. "It's just a car, sweetie. I know it's upsetting, but you can't let stuff come between family. You two used to be so close when you were little." And I wanted to ask her if she remembered the time Derek shaved my eyebrows off in my sleep and blamed it on our cousin's dog, or the time he pushed me down the stairs during a game of tag and said I tripped because I was clumsy. But of course she didn't. Because when boys do it, it's harmless. When girls get mad about it, it's bitterness. My mother, who had been silent the whole time, finally looked at me with those damp eyes that always made me feel guilty before she even said a word. "Honey," she said, "you've always been the strong one. You know Derek doesn't think things through. He's impulsive. But he loves you. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive him? He feels awful." And when I looked at Derek, still smiling, still tapping his fingers to some beat only he could hear, I knew he didn't feel a damn thing. I sat there, feeling like I was suffocating in that stale living room, surrounded by people who hadn't listened to me in years, and for a moment I actually questioned my own anger. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe it really was just a car. But then I remembered the way he laughed when he told me it was totaled. I remembered the smugness in his voice when he said, "They'll guilt you into forgiving me." And most of all, I remembered what they didn't know yet, what none of them had even considered: the dashcam. It had been recording the whole time. And it didn't just show the crash, it showed everything. It showed him picking up a woman I didn't recognize, cranking the music, drinking from a silver flask while running red lights and blowing past stop signs. It showed the near miss with a kid on a bicycle, the shouting, the way he and the woman laughed after the airbags deployed like it was all some kind of ride at an amusement park. It showed a man who wasn't sorry. It showed a man who wasn't even sober. I didn't say a word about the footage. Not that night. I sat there, nodding along, pretending to consider their requests, letting the guilt wash over me the way they wanted it to. Because I needed to be sure, absolutely sure, that when I showed them the truth, it would land like a bomb. That night, after I got home, I poured a glass of wine and sat down at my laptop. I uploaded the footage to a private folder, labeled it with the date of the crash, and watched it twice. Not because I needed to confirm anything, but because I wanted the image of his face, so casual, so careless, burned into my memory. They think I'm the dramatic one. They think I'm the one who can't let go. But they're wrong. I can let go. Of the car. Of the money. Even of the years I spent keeping my mouth shut. What I can't let go of is the truth. And very soon, neither will they. There's something deeply unsettling about watching your reality reflected back at you from the cold, unblinking eye of a camera, a device that doesn't care about context, doesn't soften the edges of truth with good intentions or emotional nuance, doesn't allow you to explain things away with the usual excuses people use to maintain whatever fragile illusions they've been living under. The dashcam footage didn't offer comfort, clarity, or closure, it offered confirmation. And as I sat in the dark at my kitchen table, staring at the flickering screen of my laptop while the video buffered, I realized that what I was about to watch wasn't just going to shift how I saw my brother, but it was going to change the story my entire family had been telling themselves for decades about him, about me, about who we really were to each other when no one was watching. It started innocently enough, or at least as innocent as it could be for someone who'd stolen a brand new car without asking. The timestamp said 9:42 in the morning. The engine roared to life, and I could see Derek's grinning face briefly reflected in the rearview mirror, his sunglasses already on, bouncing to music that he'd cranked up the moment he shifted into reverse. He wasn't alone. Less than 2 blocks from my house, he pulled up to a curb, honked once, and a woman I didn't recognize, mid-20s maybe, tall, blonde, wearing leggings and a hoodie, hopped in like she'd done it 100 times. They kissed. Not a shy, secretive kiss, but the kind that says there are no consequences waiting at home. I didn't know if she was a girlfriend, a fling, or someone he'd picked up the night before. What mattered more was how comfortable he looked, like this wasn't an accident, like this was a plan. By the time they reached the highway, I could already feel the tension building in my chest, not just because I saw him take a silver flask from the center console and hand it to her like it was a soda, but because I knew, deep in my bones, that this wasn't a one-time thing. He took a swig, laughed so hard he almost missed the exit, then gunned the accelerator past a stop sign that could have killed someone if they'd been crossing the street. Every mile, every minute, pulled the mask off a little more. There was no dog. No emergency. No guilt. There was only recklessness, entitlement, and a complete absence of fear, because Derek had never lived with consequences, not real ones, and certainly not the kind that would follow him past our mother's scolding or my father's brooding silence. And then came the moment, the one that stole my breath and left my hands numb. The car was cutting through a residential neighborhood, fast, too fast for that area, when a boy, couldn't have been more than 10 or 11, darted into the street on his bike. The woman screamed. Derek yanked the wheel so hard the tires screeched, narrowly avoiding the kid by inches, and slammed the SUV into a parked pickup truck. The airbags exploded like fists. The camera went black for 2 seconds. And then, somehow laughter. Through the haze, through the chaos, I could hear Derek laughing. And not the nervous, panicked kind of laugh that sometimes bubbles up when shock sets in, but real laughter, the kind of laughter that says, "Did you see that? That was wild." I paused the video. I sat there in silence for a long time, staring at the frozen frame of Derek fumbling out of the driver's seat, wiping glass off his jacket like it was just another bad day, not the aftermath of what could have been a fatal crash. I thought about the boy on the bike, about his parents, about how close they'd come to waking up that morning and not knowing it would be the last time they'd hear their son's voice. And then I thought about my mother, sitting in her living room, asking me to forgive him again, as if all he'd done was scratch the bumper or miss a family dinner. I pressed play again, watching the scene unfold to the bitter end. I saw Derek arguing with a bystander, shrugging off questions, then calling someone on speakerphone, probably Mom, though the audio was muffled. I watched him make a joke to the woman, something I couldn't quite hear, but she laughed anyway. I watched him walk away from the wreck like he always had, untouched, unchanged, unashamed. The rage that crept into my chest wasn't loud or sudden. It was slow, heavy, the kind that settles into your bones and changes the temperature of your blood. I'd spent years being the responsible one, the dependable one, the quiet cleanup crew to his disaster parade. I'd kept my mouth shut through so many family dinners, so many phone calls that started with, "Can you believe what your brother did this time?" but ended with, "Well, at least he's trying." I'd nodded, smiled, swallowed it all down, because it was easier than fighting the tide of forgiveness they all forced on me. But now I had something none of them could deny. Not a feeling. Not a hunch. Not a tearful story. I had proof. I uploaded the footage to a private cloud folder, locked it with a password only I knew, and titled it, simply, Crash Truth. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just factual. Cold, like the lens that had captured it. I watched the file finish uploading, and as the loading bar hit 100%, I felt something in me settle. Not peace, not satisfaction, but clarity. Derek had crossed a line. Not just with me, not just with the car, but with the world around him. He had driven straight through every boundary, every safeguard, every hand that had ever tried to hold him accountable, and for once, he wasn't going to get away with it. The next morning, he texted me again, casual as ever. "So, you still mad or what? You gonna tell Mom you're over it so we can all move on?" I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because I knew what I was going to do. And when I did it, there wouldn't be a single laugh left in the room. There's a strange, almost theatrical silence that comes before certain moments in life, the kind of silence you feel pressing against your chest before a verdict is read, before the first clap of thunder hits during a summer storm, or, in my case, before walking into a house filled with people who think they know you, think they've already written the story of what you'll say, how you'll react, and who you'll forgive, because you always do. That silence was with me from the moment I parked outside my mother's house on Sunday evening, the sky dimming into a pale orange bruise overhead, the air still and heavy, as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath for what I was about to unleash. And make no mistake, I wasn't going there to talk. I wasn't going there to negotiate peace or give in to another round of sentimental apologies drenched in excuses and blind loyalty. I was going there with purpose, with intention, with the truth clutched tightly in my hand like a sharpened blade. Not to wound, but to cut through the fog of delusion that had been clouding my family for years. Inside, everything was as familiar as it had always been, down to the smell of my mother's pot roast lingering in the hallway, thick with rosemary and guilt. A scent that brought back so many memories of forced smiles and swallowed resentment that I almost had to steady myself against the doorframe. The living room was already crowded when I walked in, Dad sitting on the recliner, nursing a beer he probably wouldn't finish, eyes flickering toward me like he already sensed something was off, Aunt Joan with her legs tucked under her on the couch, rosary beads wrapped tight around her fingers like she expected someone to say a prayer before dessert, and of course, Derek, lounging with his back against the far end of the sofa, one leg slung over the other, tapping his phone and sipping soda as if nothing in the world could possibly be wrong, as if this was just another Sunday. He looked up when I entered and smiled, that same infuriating, boyish smile that had gotten him out of more trouble than most people could survive. "Hey, Rachel," he said, casual, breezy, fake. "Glad you made it. We were starting to think you'd bailed." And I could feel the tension behind my teeth as I forced a smile in return, a smile that had nothing to do with kindness and everything to do with the game I was about to end. My mother appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, her face brightening like she genuinely believed this would all be resolved with warm food and polite conversation. "You're just in time," she said. I was about to plate everything up. "Why don't you all sit down? We can talk while we eat." She was smiling, but I could see the edges of worry in her eyes, the thin lines that always showed when she was bracing for conflict she didn't want to admit was coming. "I want to talk first," I said, stepping further into the room, pulling a small remote from my coat pocket and clicking it once, turning the TV on. The screen lit up, bright and silent, and suddenly all eyes were on me, not curious, not alarmed, just mildly confused, like I had brought the wrong kind of birthday card to the party. "I need you to see something," I said, my voice steady, even emotionless. "Then we can eat." No one moved. I clicked play. The footage began without warning, the sound of the ignition and music blaring from the speakers making my mother flinch. Derek's voice filled the room as he laughed and joked, pulling away from my house, sunglasses on, attitude cocky. The woman getting into the passenger seat earned a few exchanged glances, no one knew who she was, and I watched my father's expression shift, slow and cold, as if some old suspicion had just been confirmed. Then came the flask, the reckless driving, the running red lights, and then the boy. When the crash happened, when the tires screeched and the SUV slammed into the side of that parked truck, my aunt dropped her rosary. My father stood up. My mother covered her mouth and sank into a chair, her eyes wide and wet with shock. Derek didn't move. He didn't speak. He didn't laugh. For the first time in what felt like years, he had no comeback, no performance, no charming shrug to offer. Just silence. The screen went black as the video ended, and I turned to face them, my hands no longer shaking, my voice no longer soft. He didn't borrow my car. He stole it. He didn't get into an accident. He got behind the wheel drunk, with someone he barely knew, and almost killed a child. And he didn't tell any of you the truth. He laughed in my face. He told me you'd all make me forgive him. And you tried. No one spoke. Not even my mother. I stepped toward Derek, who still hadn't said a word, his mouth slightly open, his eyes darting between our father and the blank TV screen like he was trying to find some exit from a room with no doors. "You said they'd guilt me into forgiving you. You were right. That's what they've always done. But this time, I wanted them to see exactly who they're defending." My father finally spoke, and when he did, it was with a voice I hadn't heard in years, stern, furious, but low and deliberate, the kind of voice that cuts deeper than shouting ever could. "Get out," he said. "You're not welcome here tonight. Maybe not again." Derek blinked. "Dad, come on. Get out." And for once, Derek didn't argue. He stood slowly, the room silent except for the faint sound of my mother quietly crying, and he walked to the door with none of his usual flair or defiance, like a magician who had finally run out of tricks. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't look back. He just left. I didn't stay much longer. I didn't eat the roast. I didn't answer my mother when she whispered, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Because the answer was too big, too heavy, too full of decades of invisible bruises no one had cared to see. I just walked out the door and into the cool night air, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the difficult one, the overreactor, the one who just needed to let it go. I felt like the only person in the family who had finally told the truth. And it wasn't over yet. There's a moment, not immediately after an earthquake, but in the days that follow, the kind of eerie, in-between stillness where the world doesn't quite look ruined, but it also doesn't look familiar anymore. And that's exactly what it felt like in the week after Sunday dinner. It was as though the ground beneath our family had split just enough to remind everyone that the foundation we thought we were standing on had been cracked all along, and the only thing that ever held it together was our shared ability to ignore the truth. After I showed them the footage, after the laughter stopped, and the silence swallowed up every excuse they might have once reached for things didn't explode, not in the dramatic, cinematic way people like to imagine when justice is finally served. No, they just stopped. Conversations stopped. Check-in calls dried up. The family group chat that used to buzz every Sunday with memes and casserole photos turned into a digital graveyard where no one dared to speak. First, Derek didn't text me for 4 days, which might not sound like much, but considering he had messaged me nearly every other day since we were old enough to type, usually some sarcastic jab or half-hearted favor request, it felt like a lifetime. When he finally did reach out, it wasn't an apology, not even close. It was a single message, short but loaded, the kind that seems harmless at first glance, but sinks into your skin like a splinter the longer you look at it. Congrats, it read. Everyone hates me now. You win. That was it. No context. No acknowledgement of what he did. Just the familiar deflection, the passive-aggressive victimhood he always wore like a second skin whenever the consequences caught up with him. And the part that stung the most wasn't the absence of regret, it was the fact that, even now, he thought this was a game I had played to win, as if the goal was to destroy him instead of protect myself. I didn't respond, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I knew it wouldn't matter. There was no combination of words that would break through the armor of entitlement he had spent his whole life building, especially when it had been reinforced for decades by everyone around us. Letting him sit with the weight of what he'd done, even if only for a few days, felt more honest than any reply I could have given. Besides, I had bigger things to deal with, namely, the insurance company, who were more than a little surprised when I sent them the dashcam footage along with my claim. Within 48 hours, I got a call from an agent whose voice went from polite to tight as soon as she realized what she was looking at. She told me, in no uncertain terms, that the policy I had wouldn't cover theft by a family member unless I pressed charges, and when I said I had no intention of taking legal action, because as much as I wanted to see him held accountable, I wasn't ready to take it. That far, she sighed and told me they'd still do what they could under the comprehensive collision clause, thanks to the documentation. In the end, they paid out just enough for me to buy a used car nowhere near what I had lost, not just in money but in trust, but it ran, and it was mine, and when I slid behind the wheel of that modest silver sedan a week later, I didn't feel joy or closure or even satisfaction. I felt something quieter, something heavier, a dull kind of freedom, like walking away from a burning house you know you'll never rebuild, not because you couldn't, but because you finally understood that it was never truly yours in the first place. I named the car Justice, not out loud, not officially, just in my head, every time I turned the key, and every mile I drove felt like another stitch in the wound slowly closing across my chest. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name in familiar handwriting. I hesitated before opening it, already knowing it was from Derek, because there's a certain kind of ego that refuses to stay quiet even when it's been publicly humbled. The letter was 3 pages long, handwritten, as if the act of putting pen to paper might somehow elevate whatever nonsense he was about to spew into something noble. And it wasn't an apology, of course not. It was a list, an actual list of things he believed I had destroyed. His relationship with our parents, his reputation, his chance to move past a mistake, his dignity. It was written with the tone of someone who still thought of himself as the protagonist in a story gone wrong, as if I were just the bitter supporting character who couldn't let him grow without tearing him down first. The last line, scrawled in increasingly angry pen strokes, said, "You broke this family over a car." I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer next to my stove, the one where I keep expired coupons and rubber bands that I never use, because that's all it was, something useless, something no longer worth keeping in plain sight but not yet ready to be thrown away. And as I stood there in my quiet kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room, I whispered the words that had been sitting in my throat since the day of the crash. Words I didn't say to anyone else because no one else would have understood the weight of them. But what about everything you destroyed, Derek, before I ever picked up that camera? Because this wasn't just about a car. It was about all the years I played the role of the peacekeeper while he played the chaos artist. It was about the invisible labor of cleaning up after someone who never learned to clean up after himself. It was about the nights I sat by the phone, wondering if the next call would be from the hospital or the police station, and the mornings I had to smile and act like nothing had happened because he'd already moved on. It was about being asked again and again to be the bigger person, the quieter person, the one who lets it go for the sake of family harmony, while he lit matches and danced in the smoke. Now that they'd seen it, now that the footage had torn through the myth of who Derek was and left the raw, unfiltered truth behind, there was no going back. The family could pretend, as they always had, that things would heal with time, that holidays would smooth over the cracks, that forgiveness was inevitable and forgetting was expected. But I had finally learned that there is no peace in pretending, no healing in silence, and no loyalty in lies. And while I didn't know what the future would look like, whether I'd ever sit at another Sunday dinner, whether my mother would ever stop looking at me like I'd betrayed her by telling the truth, whether Derek would ever change, I knew this much with absolute certainty. I wasn't going back to who I was before. Not for them. Not for him. Not for anyone.